Contrary to popular belief, including the previous belief of myself, hope is not naive optimism. As I've kind of briefly touched on in some of my previous videos, one of the things that I really struggled with when I was younger was viewing hope in this world as blind optimism and ignorance. But today I am proud to say that I can offer a different perspective, one that maybe somebody out there needs to hear. And that is of hope as a neurological state that can expand what we perceive as possible, and potentially even as a political act of rebellion in a world that is actively profiting from our fear, complacency, and surrender. Because consistently having hope isn't just a feeling, and as I've continually stressed throughout the course of my videos, what we repeat to ourselves is what we render into our realities. Meaning hope has the power to change how our brains work, which in turn can change our outcomes. Starting off with hope as a neurobiological mechanism, if we remember from previous videos, what we continually repeat to ourselves can legitimately shape our neural pathways through a process called neuroplasticity. And basically what this is contrary to popular belief, the brain is constantly changing. Every time you are presented with new information and you take that on as a learning experience, new pathways are being formed within your brain, and each time you repeat that learning experience, those pathways strengthen. So if you have chronic fear and helplessness, then those are the pathways that are being strengthened within your brain. And those are based on the threat-based neural networks. And if we look at this from a psychological perspective, it makes sense why so many people feel this way because of something called negativity bias, or our brain's natural tendency to spot out the things that are negative in our environment more so than the things that are positive. Evolutionarily, this served us because we need to be able to be responsive to threat. But in today's day and age, where for most of us our basic needs are being met, this bias can tend us towards complacency, helplessness, and fear. Hope, on the other hand, activates goal-directed circuits in the brain. It engages planning, future-oriented thinking, and goal-based behaviors, which are all processes that happen in the prefrontal cortex. So where fear narrows perception by activating the amygdala and the emotional centers of the brain, hope widens it by activating the prefrontal cortex and starting goal-oriented thinking, which essentially means that hope is literally expanding your brain's menu, so to speak, of the options that it could possibly take or what can happen. Now, this is not me trying to say, just think positively, because to be honest, when I was mentally ill, I used to hate people who would tell me that. But instead, what I'm saying is that practicing the act of having hope day on day will naturally begin to rewire your neural pathways by putting you into this goal-oriented mode. Now, there's this psychologist named C.R. Snyder who did a lot of research into hope, and he formulated this really interesting theory that I wanted to share with you. He conceptualized hope as agency plus belief. Agency being the belief that you have agency or control over actions that you can take, and pathways being the actual actionable steps that you can go down. His research also found that having higher levels of hope correlated with better problem solving, greater persistence, and better mental health outcomes overall. He also made this really interesting distinction between learned helplessness and learned agency, finding that when people believe that nothing they do or say really matters, then they stop acting, but also finding that hope can interrupt this loop, which I guess is why I'm trying to make this video. But the key idea that I want you to take away is that hope doesn't mean pretending things aren't bad. Hope instead is refusing to believe that nothing can be done about it. But oftentimes, to the cynics and even to 12-year-old me, surrender feels more rational than hope does. And a lot of the time, the very systems that are made to give us entertainment are actually pushing us deeper into complacency. Now, there is a plethora of research that talks about doom scrolling and social media and its effects on the brain. I could honestly do a whole separate video on that. But to briefly touch on it, doom scrolling literally trains the brain into having this hypervigilance and essentially paralysis. And social media platforms are actually rewarding outrage and despair because fear keeps attention and attention builds profit, which is exactly why hope is dangerous to systems that are built on compliance. Which is why I believe that when we talk about hope, we're not just talking about mindset, we're literally talking about taking power back. And that, my friends, is where hope becomes an act of rebellion. Now, there is an alarming number of global crises happening in the world right now. And growing up in this environment, I think I can speak for a lot of other people in Gen Z when I say that this constant exposure to all of the man-made atrocities can literally be debilitating. And it can lead to this exhaustion and deep feeling of helplessness. And I want to validate that because, again, I have very much been in that place. And I think it's something that a lot of us are feeling right now. But we're also being taught to confuse awareness with paralysis when that simply isn't true. It feels like everywhere I look, especially on social media platforms, people are saying, we're so cooked. And once again, I get it. Imminent threat of World War III, the Epstein files coming out, and us all finding out that we're basically being run by this demonic psyop. Now, I don't use that term literally, but please understand what I'm talking about. I don't want to repeat it. It makes me sick. And then on top of that, we add the global destruction of our environment. But none of these things are going to change if we don't change. And I also wanted to offer a different perspective on the issue. One that is rooted in hope and I think much needed. What I think we are really currently witnessing is the death of the old world order. Yes, we have been spun into chaos, and yes, things look and feel so grim right now. But systems like these breaking down do not always have to be meaningless. And when we look throughout history, more often than not, collapse is actually a transition into something better. And I personally feel as though this is an opportunity for us to, I guess, be the midwives of a new world order, if we are brave and hopeful enough to take it. And I'd also like to take the time to remind everyone that there are a lot of people out there doing good. And watching the next line of world leaders take their stand has given me an immense amount of hope for future generations. Whether that be Mamdani, Hannah Rafiti, Greta Thunberg, these people are reminding all of us that A, our voices matter, no matter how small, and B, one person can inspire millions to make meaningful change if those millions get on board. And in my opinion, they are changing what it means to be a politician by serving the people rather than the producers. Because change is what happens when people refuse despair. And I want to make it clear here that the enemy is complacency, not awareness. Because the existing power structures are relying on exhaustion, fear, and complacency, rather than hope and collective movement. Because hope and collective movement disrupts all three. Which is why they are not afraid of your anger. They are more afraid of your belief that change is possible. Whether that be through voting, through petitions, through protests, we have seen time and time again how one spark can turn into an uproaring flame. But to ground us back a little bit more, this is not me saying necessarily, go and save the world, although I think when enough of us band together, that is possible. What I'm really saying here is, do not abandon yourself. Speak up, vote, create, organize, rest without giving up. Because having faith in a better future begins with having faith in ourselves. I love you guys. I'll see you guys next time.